President Lincoln's funeral journey from Washington, D.C. to Springfield, Illinois, with the major city stops between the two locations. As the train runs the rails, you'll hear the history of the event, and video of the time will appear on the screen up above.
On April 21st, 1865, a funeral train would leave Washington, D.C. Within the train was the funeral car carrying the bodies of the 16th President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln, and his son Willie, who had died in 1862 of disease. The journey had actually began 7 days earlier, April 14, 1865, with the assassination of President Lincoln. The first stop on the long journey home was Baltimore's Camden Station. In Philadelphia, at Baltimore Station, the President's remains were taken through the streets of Philadelphia to Independence Hall. Over 300,000 citizens would watch the procession and view the casket. At each stop, soldiers of the Veterans Reserve, all wounded heroes of the Republic, would be the honor guard and those who would carry the casket to its viewing site. As the train moved north through Trenton, New Jersey, it would come to Jersey City and finally be ferried across the Hudson River to New York City.
Fire is written up outside this door if after the ride anyone's interested. Now, President Lincoln's funeral car was actually supposed to have been our first United States presidential car. Going into his second term in office, the federal government had opted to provide him with a private car. They created a very elaborate train. He would have had available to him a parlor, war room, and sleeping quarters. There was a car for his family as well, which included a kitchen. Ironically, the day he died is the day he was to have test-ridden that, so apparently he never stepped aboard while he was living. Immediately upon his death, the government began refurbishing his car to be the funeral car with the full intention of doing the funeral journey. However, when they approached his wife, Mary Todd Lincoln, about it, she adamantly refused. Mary Todd wanted a quick, quiet, private viewing and funeral. It was their oldest son, Robert, who convinced her the nation should have a chance to mourn the loss of the president, so she struck a deal with the government. As you learned on that layout, Willie was on that ride. Well, Willie had died 2 years earlier, they think from typhoid fever, and at the time of his death, he was laid to rest in what was intended to be a temporary memorial site in Oak Hill Cemetery near Washington, D.C., with the intentions of taking him home with them, with Lincoln, when he left office, to be buried with his little brother, Eddie, who had died when he was just 3. So Mary Todd told the government, if you'd like to do this funeral journey, I'm going to expect you to take Willie home now. That's how he ended up on the ride. Robert did escort their remains to the funeral car, but left the procession to go back and stay with his mother in Washington. She was quite distraught, you can imagine. She was bedridden for about 5 weeks after the assassination of her husband. He did leave her side to go to the funeral, though. He and a cousin of the family were the only family members to have attended. But to this day, all the Lincolns, except for Robert, are laid to rest together in Springfield. Robert served the nation under Grant. He is buried in Arlington. They had one other son, Tad, who would pass away at the age of 18 of heart failure, so Robert was the only one to grow up and have children of his own. He had 2 daughters and a son. His son would pass away at the age of 16 of blood poisoning, and the last direct descendant of Lincoln passed away in 1985. The lights blinking was my signal to exit. They will dim. You will be joined by Lincoln as he shares his love of America with you. At the end of the ride, exit either door and spend as much time in the museum as you like. Enjoy.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Robert was a staff officer.
Hello. I must thank you for your kindness in accompanying my son Willie and me home to our beloved Springfield. I had much to do yet, much to accomplish, but that opportunity was denied me. I have left the task in the good hands of generations of Americans who have taken up the challenge, bore those hardships and the sadness, but always in the end have moved forward. Your America is truly a wonderful and more than 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now, we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this, but in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggle here, have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little know, no longer remember what we say, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead, we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.